The sound of a cane tapping against linoleum echoed through the narrow hallway of the Mariposa Arms apartments, each measured strike announcing her presence before anyone could see her face. This was how Daniel Torres first heard Sarah Mitchell. Not saw her, but heard her. And that distinction would come to matter more than he could have imagined. It was August in San Bernardino, California, 1970, and the air inside the third-floor walk-up carried the smell of yesterday's meatloaf mingling with cigarette smoke that seeped from under doors. The wallpaper, once cream-colored, had faded to the yellow of old newspapers. Daniel stood in his doorway, grocery bag balanced on one hip, keys dangling from his mouth, when his 8-year-old daughter Sofia practically collided with him from behind. "Daddy, look! Someone new is moving in!" He'd noticed. Hard not to. The moving van had been parked outside since morning, and now a young woman, mid-20s maybe, was making her way down the hall with that cane, her other hand trailing along the wall. Her landlord, Mr. Kowalski, walked beside her, droning instructions about garbage day and laundry hours that she'd never be able to follow, because she couldn't see the schedule posted in the basement. Daniel felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the weight of wanting to help and knowing he shouldn't get involved. "She's blind, mija," he said quietly, shifting the groceries. "Don't stare." But Sofia was already moving, drawn forward by that uncomplicated compassion that children possess before the world teaches them caution. Before Daniel could stop her, his daughter had darted into the hallway. "Hi, I'm Sofia. Do you need help finding your apartment?" The young woman stopped, her face turning toward Sofia's voice with startling precision. When she smiled, something shifted in the stale hallway air, warmth breaking through the institutional gray of the building. "Hello, Sofia. I'm Sarah. And yes, actually, I'd love some help." Daniel watched his daughter take Sarah's free hand without hesitation, chattering about how apartment 308 was right next to theirs, how the carpet was scratchy in some spots but soft in others, how you had to jiggle the doorknob just right or it would stick. And that's when Daniel noticed something that made him pause. Sarah's eyes, though unfocused, were moving. Not randomly, but purposefully, tracking the sound of Sofia's voice, the direction of footsteps, the rustle of Mr. Kowalski's jacket. She navigated the hallway with a confidence that seemed almost impossible for someone who'd just arrived, who couldn't see the obstacles. Later, after Mr. Kowalski had left and Sofia had returned home buzzing with excitement about their new friend, Daniel stood at his kitchen window overlooking the parking lot. He watched Sarah emerge from the building alone, cane sweeping the pavement, and walk directly to the corner store 2 blocks away without a single misstep. Where you're watching from matters, drop your city and time in the comments below. And if this story has you hooked already, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. Daniel Torres was 32 years old and had been raising Sofia alone since his wife Maria died 3 years earlier, lung cancer that took her in 6 brutal months. He worked double shifts at the textile factory on weekdays and picked up weekend maintenance jobs to keep them afloat. The Mariposa Arms wasn't much, but it was theirs, and he'd learned the hard way that getting close to people meant risking the kind of pain he couldn't afford. Sofia, though. Sofia was different. She'd been 5 when Maria died, and for a year afterward she barely spoke. The grief counselor said it was normal, that children process loss in their own time. But Daniel had watched his bright, talkative daughter retreat into silence, and it had terrified him more than anything. Now, at 8, she was finally coming back to herself, laughing again, making friends at school, talking about her day over dinner. Daniel protected that fragile recovery like a guard dog, suspicious of anything that might threaten it. And a mysterious blind woman moving in next door, immediately captivating his daughter's attention. That felt like a threat. "Can we invite Miss Sarah for dinner?" Sofia asked that first night, picking at her rice and beans. "She just moved in, mija. She's probably busy unpacking. But she's all alone. and she told me she doesn't know anyone in California yet. Daniel studied his daughter's face across their small kitchen table. The apartment was cramped. One bedroom that Sofia used while he slept on the pull-out couch. A kitchen barely big enough for two people to stand in. A bathroom with perpetually dripping pipes. But Sofia had decorated the walls with her drawings, and Maria's plants still lined the windowsill, somehow thriving despite Daniel's neglect. "Maybe later this week," he said, knowing it was a weak deflection. Sofia's eyes, Maria's eyes, that same deep brown, fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You don't like her. I don't know her. That's why we should have her for dinner, so we can know her." The logic was unassailable, the way only a child's logic can be. But something about Sarah Mitchell bothered him. The way she'd moved through that hallway with such certainty. The way she'd smiled at Sofia as if she could actually see her. The way his daughter had immediately trusted her, when Sofia had been wary of strangers since Maria's death. What Daniel couldn't have known, what he wouldn't discover until much later, was that Sarah Mitchell had deliberately chosen apartment 308, not randomly, not coincidentally. She'd chosen it because it was next to theirs, and the reason why would shatter everything Daniel thought he understood about his wife's death, his daughter's grief, and the woman with the white cane who'd just walked into their lives. Sofia knocked on Sarah's door exactly 3 times, the way she'd been taught, before Daniel could stop her. It was Thursday evening, 4 days after Sarah had moved in, and his daughter had been relentless in her campaign. Every night at dinner, the same request. Every morning before school, the same hopeful question. Daniel had finally surrendered, though unease still coiled in his stomach like a spring wound too tight. The hallway smelled different now. Sarah's apartment leaked the scent of vanilla and something else. Something floral that reminded Daniel painfully of Maria's perfume. He stood behind Sofia, still wearing his factory uniform, grease stains on the cuffs despite his scrubbing. The door opened. Sarah stood there in a simple yellow dress, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. No shoes. Daniel noticed that immediately, the way her toes curled against the threshold. Her eyes, pale gray blue, looked somewhere past Sofia's shoulder, but her smile was directed perfectly at his daughter's height. "Sofia?" I thought I recognized those 3 quick knocks. "Miss Sarah! We came to invite you to dinner. Daddy's making his famous enchiladas." Daniel cleared his throat. "They're not famous. They're just adequate." Sarah's smile widened, and she turned her face toward his voice. "Mr. Torres, I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk properly." Something in the way she said his name, the slight emphasis, as if she'd been expecting this moment, sent a chill across his shoulders despite the August heat. "Please call me Daniel. And yes, we'd love to have you over. If you're free." "I'm free." She said it immediately, without checking a calendar or making an excuse. Just those 2 words, delivered with an eagerness that felt almost rehearsed. 30 minutes later, they sat around Daniel's small kitchen table. Sofia had insisted on setting a place with Maria's good plates, the ones with the hand-painted flowers that they only used on special occasions. Daniel had tried to protest, but his daughter had fixed him with that look, the one that said she was making a decision about something important, even if the adults couldn't see it yet. Sarah navigated the unfamiliar space with remarkable ease. Her fingers traced the table's edge, located her water glass, found her fork and knife with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of years adapting to darkness. But it was the way she tilted her head when Sofia spoke, the way she seemed to track his daughter's movements around the room, that caught Daniel's attention. "These enchiladas are wonderful," Sarah said after her first bite. "There's cinnamon in the sauce. And is that a touch of orange zest?" Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "How did you—" "Yes, Maria, my wife, she taught me. It was her mother's recipe, Maria." Sarah repeated the name softly, as if tasting it along with the food. Sofia mentioned her. I'm sorry for your loss. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the drip of the bathroom pipes and the distant sound of someone's television through the thin walls. Sofia was watching both adults with that grave attention children employ when they sense the conversation has entered adult territory. It was 3 years ago, Daniel said finally. Lung cancer. She never smoked a day in her life. Life isn't fair that way. Sarah's fingers found her water glass, lifted it. My mother died when I was 12. Car accident. I was in the back seat. Sofia gasped. Is that when you couldn't see anymore? Sofia, Daniel said sharply. That's not polite to ask. But Sarah shook her head. It's all right. Yes, sweetie. The accident damaged my optic nerves. I woke up in the hospital, and everything was dark. She said it matter-of-factly, without the weight of tragedy Daniel had been expecting. But he saw Sofia's face transform, the way understanding bloomed there, the connection being forged between her loss and Sarah's. I was 5 when Mommy died, Sofia said quietly. I don't remember as much as I want to. Sarah reached across the table, her hand moving with surprising accuracy to land exactly where Sofia's hand rested beside her plate. The things that matter, you remember. Not always the big moments, but the small ones. The feeling of her hand in yours, the sound of her voice, the way she made you feel safe. Daniel watched his daughter's eyes fill with tears. Not sad tears, but something else. Recognition, maybe. Or relief. She used to tell me stories, Sofia whispered. Every night before bed. Made up stories about princesses and dragons and magic gardens. What kind of stories? And just like that, Sofia was talking, really talking, about Maria in a way she hadn't since the funeral. The words poured out of her, memories Daniel hadn't known she'd retained. How Maria would do different voices for each character. How she'd let Sofia choose what happened next in the story. How the best stories always ended with the princess learning she'd been brave all along. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. For 3 years, he'd tried to get Sofia to talk about her mother. The counselor had tried. Her teachers had tried. But here, across a table with a stranger who couldn't even see her face, his daughter was finally opening up. The stories we need most find us when we're ready. Would you tell me one? Sofia asked suddenly. A story like that? Sarah smiled. I'd love to, but only if your father doesn't mind me stealing his bedtime routine. Daniel should have said no. Every instinct told him to keep this stranger at arm's length, to protect the fragile ecosystem he'd built with his daughter. But Sofia was looking at him with more hope than he'd seen in years, and he found himself nodding. Just for tonight. They moved to the living room, Sofia pulling Sarah by the hand to the worn couch. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching as Sarah settled into the cushions and Sofia curled up, beside her like a cat finding warmth. Once upon a time, Sarah began. There was a little girl who lived in a garden that only bloomed at night. Her voice was different now, melodic, textured with the kind of practiced storytelling that comes from repetition. She wove a tale about a girl who could only see in darkness, who discovered that the world had different kinds of light, who learned that sometimes losing one thing meant finding something else. Daniel realized with growing unease that the story was about Sofia, not explicitly, not with matching details, but the emotional truth of it, the grief, the adaptation, the slow discovery of new joys. It was all there, as if Sarah had known his daughter her entire life, as if she'd been preparing this story specifically for her. When Sarah finished, Sofia was asleep against her shoulder. The apartment had fallen into that particular silence that comes when a child finally finds peace. Daniel moved forward, intending to carry Sofia to bed, but Sarah spoke first. Daniel, can I ask you something? Of course. The night Maria died. Was there anything unusual about it? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of alarm through Daniel's careful composure. What do you mean? Sarah's sightless eyes seemed to fix on him with unnerving precision. I mean, did the doctors explain everything? Were you satisfied with their answers? Daniel's mouth went dry. How could you possibly? Because, Sarah interrupted gently, I don't think Maria died from cancer alone. And I think, somewhere deep down, you've always suspected the same thing. The room tilted. Sofia stirred but didn't wake, and Daniel Torres realized that Sarah Mitchell hadn't moved into apartment 308 by accident. She'd come looking for something, or someone. The textile factory where Daniel worked occupied a squat brick building on the east side of San Bernardino, its windows permanently fogged with lint and chemical residue. He'd barely slept after Sarah's question, her words circling his mind like vultures over carrion. It was Friday morning, 6:45, and the first shift was already in full swing, the industrial looms creating a wall of sound that made thinking impossible, which was exactly what Daniel needed. He fed fabric through the cutting machine with mechanical precision, trying to lose himself in the rhythm of work. But his hands were shaking. Maria's death had been explained with clinical detachment by doctors who'd seen too much suffering to offer more than medical facts. Stage 4, adenocarcinoma, metastasized to the lymph nodes, then the liver. 6 months from diagnosis to death, which the oncologist had described as typical progression for this presentation. Daniel had accepted it because what choice did he have? You don't question doctors. You don't demand alternative explanations when your wife is dying in front of you, when every day brings new pain, new deterioration, new losses. Except Maria had been healthy before. No family history of cancer, no smoking, minimal drinking. She'd worked as a seamstress from home, spending her days at her singer machine in their apartment, taking in alterations and custom orders. And she'd been scared those last few weeks. Not of dying. She'd made peace with that. But scared of something else. Something she'd tried to tell Daniel about in fragments between morphine doses. The fabric, she'd whispered one night, her hand clutching his with surprising strength. Daniel, the fabric they sent, it wasn't right. Something chemical. Burning smell. He'd assumed it was the medication talking, the mind creating phantom enemies to explain the body's betrayal. But what if it wasn't? Torres, you listening? Daniel jerked back to the present. His supervisor, Chuck Brennan, stood beside him, red-faced and annoyed. Sorry, what? I said we got a quality control issue. Batch from last month. Customers reporting rashes, chemical burns. Corporates sending someone to investigate. Chuck lowered his voice. Between you and me, I think someone's been cutting corners on the dye processing. You worked with Maria on some of those specialty orders, right? The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. What kind of specialty orders? The ones for that new client. Western something. High-end stuff. Rush jobs. Maria did the finishing work from home, didn't she? Western Textile Solutions. The name surfaced from memory like a body from deep water. Maria had been excited about that contract. Good money, steady work. The client didn't mind that she worked from their apartment. They'd sent her fabric samples, dyes, detailed specifications. She'd gotten sick 2 months after starting that contract. Chuck, do we still have records? Invoices? Shipping manifests? Probably in the archive room. Why? But Daniel was already moving, threading through the factory floor with purpose, his earlier exhaustion replaced by something sharper. The archive room was a glorified closet in the back, stuffed with filing cabinets that dated back to the factory's opening in 1948. He found the file labeled Western Textile Solutions in less than 10 minutes. It was empty. Not just thin, completely empty. The folder existed, but every document had been removed. Even the tab showed signs of recent handling, the edges not yet yellowed with age. Someone had cleaned it out. Someone didn't want a paper trail. Daniel's vision narrowed. He thought about Sarah Mitchell's question, the certainty in her voice when she'd asked if Maria's death had been fully explained. He thought about the way Sarah had moved into the apartment next door, The way she'd befriended Sofia so quickly, so naturally. The way she'd known exactly what to ask. Some coincidences are too perfect to be accidents. He left work early, claiming stomach flu. Chuck didn't argue. Daniel never took sick days, had built up enough goodwill to cash in without questions. By noon, he was standing in the public library on E Street asking the librarian for help with the microfiche machine. I need newspapers from 3 years ago. Any articles about Western textile solutions or unexplained illnesses in San Bernardino. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with cat-eye glasses and efficient hands, brought him spools of film. "You writing a story, honey?" Something like that. He spent 2 hours scrolling through archived pages before he found it. A small article, buried on page 7 of the San Bernardino Sun from November 1967. 4 paragraphs about a lawsuit filed against Western Textile Solutions by the family of a woman who died after working with their fabrics. The woman's name was Catherine Brennan. The article mentioned chemical exposure, specifically an industrial dye containing benzidine compounds, known carcinogens that had been banned in several European countries but were still legal in California. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, sealed records, no admission of wrongdoing. Catherine Brennan. Chuck's last name was Brennan. Daniel's hands froze on the microfiche controls. He scrolled back, read the article again. Catherine Brennan, age 34, survived by her husband Charles and daughter Sarah, age 12. Sarah. The library's fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly, the air too thin. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears as the pieces assembled themselves with terrible clarity. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Brennan Mitchell, probably. She'd mentioned her mother died in a car accident when she was 12, but she'd never mentioned her mother's first name. Never mentioned that her father worked at the same textile factory where Daniel worked, where Maria had gotten sick. He drove home with his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, breaking the speed limit, running a yellow light that turned red before he cleared the intersection. The Mariposa Arms had never looked more ominous than it did in the afternoon sun. Its stucco facade cracked and water-stained, hiding secrets behind every door. Daniel took the stairs 2 at a time. Sofia would be at school for another 2 hours. He'd timed this deliberately, needing to confront Sarah alone, without his daughter's innocent presence complicating things. He pounded on apartment 308's door hard enough that Mrs. Chen across the hall peeked out, then quickly retreated when she saw his face. Sarah opened the door after the 3rd knock. She wasn't surprised. He could see that immediately. The way she stood in the doorway, already dressed as if she'd been expecting him, her posture straight but not defensive. "Daniel, you found out." Not a question. A statement. "You're Chuck Brennan's daughter." His voice was rough, accusatory. "Catherine Brennan was your mother. She died from the same thing that killed Maria. Chemical exposure from Western Textile Solutions." Sarah nodded slowly. "May I invite you in? This conversation shouldn't happen in the hallway." He wanted to refuse, wanted to rage at her right there where the neighbors could hear, but the practical part of his brain won out. He pushed past her into the apartment, and she closed the door with careful precision. Her apartment was sparse, a few pieces of furniture, boxes still unpacked in the corner, but the walls were already covered with something that made Daniel's breath catch. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned up with the systematic precision of an investigation board. He moved closer, his anger momentarily forgotten. There were pictures of the textile factory, of Western Textile Solutions' corporate office downtown, of shipping manifests and chemical formulas. But more than that, there were photographs of people, women specifically, 15, maybe 20 different faces, each with a name and date written beneath in braille and ink. Catherine Brennan, 1967. Maria Torres, 1967. And 13 others, spanning from 1964 to 1969. "They're all dead," Sarah said quietly behind him. Every single woman in those photographs. All of them did finishing work for Western Textile Solutions. All of them developed aggressive cancers. All of them died within 6 months of diagnosis. Daniel's legs felt weak. He reached out to steady himself against the wall. 15 women. 15 that I could confirm. I suspect there are more, but their families didn't connect the dots, or they took settlements and signed non-disclosure agreements. Sarah moved to stand beside him, her fingers finding one of the photographs with practiced ease. My mother was the first to fight back. She filed a lawsuit, demanded an investigation. 3 days before her court date, she died in a car accident. But you said... I said the accident damaged my optic nerves, that's true. What I didn't say is that someone cut the brake lines on my mother's car. Sarah's voice was steady, but Daniel heard the tremor underneath. The police called it vandalism, bad luck, tragic timing. My father knew better. But he had a 12-year-old daughter who'd just been blinded and lost her mother. He took their settlement money, signed their papers, and tried to protect me by staying silent. Daniel turned to face her fully. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because I needed proof that you weren't part of it. Sarah's sightless eyes seemed to bore into him. Western Textile Solutions has people everywhere. Factory workers, managers, even some law enforcement. I couldn't risk approaching you directly until I was certain you were another victim, not another conspirator. So, you befriended my daughter? Used her to get to me? The accusation hung between them like smoke. Sarah's face tightened. I befriended Sofia because she needed someone who understood loss, because I heard her playing in the hallway and recognized something of myself in her laughter, the way she's learning to be happy again despite the hole in her world. Her voice softened. And yes, because I needed to know if you suspected anything about Maria's death. But I never lied to her, Daniel. Every story I told, every moment we shared, that was real. Daniel wanted to stay angry, but the photographs on the wall kept pulling his attention. 15 women, 15 families destroyed, and how many more if Sarah was right about unreported cases? What do you want from me? I want justice. Sarah moved to her small dining table where more documents were spread out. Legal papers, medical records, chemical analyses. I've spent the last 10 years building a case, teaching myself law, chemistry, investigative techniques. Everything I couldn't see, I learned to understand through other means. My father helps when he can, though it terrifies him. But I need more. She pulled out a folder, offered it to Daniel. Maria kept samples. Did you know that? Fabric samples from every job she worked on. I found her storage unit 6 months ago. Chuck told me about it. Said she'd rented it to store overflow materials. Daniel's hands shook as he opened the folder. Inside were laboratory reports dated from 2 months ago, analyzing fabric samples labeled with Maria's handwriting. Benzidine compounds, formaldehyde, heavy metals, all in concentrations far exceeding legal limits. All in the fabrics Maria had worked with during her final months. The storage unit, Daniel whispered. How did you even know to look? Because my mother did the same thing. She kept samples too, documented everything. After she died, my father destroyed most of it. He was terrified they'd come after me next. But I remembered where she'd hidden her favorite pieces, the ones she was most proud of. When I got older, I had them tested. Sarah's jaw tightened. Same chemicals, same illegal concentrations, same company. Daniel sank into a chair, the folder falling open across his lap. They murdered her. They murdered Maria. They murdered 15 women that we know of, probably more. They've been using home workers specifically because there's less oversight, less chance of inspection, less risk of exposure, literally. Sarah's bitter laugh was sharp. Women working from home, trying to earn extra money for their families, poisoned by fabrics soaked in carcinogens. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Because Western Textile Solutions is owned by Garrett Industries, and Garrett Industries has contracts with the Defense Department, political connections that go all the way to Sacramento, and enough money to make problems disappear. Sarah moved to the window, her hand finding the frame with automatic precision. They've been settling cases quietly for years, making people sign away their rights to sue in exchange for enough money to bury their dead and try to move on. The powerful protect themselves by silencing the vulnerable. Daniel looked at the photographs again, really looked at them. 15 women, most of them young, all of them smiling in their pictures, captured in moments before they knew what was coming. Mothers, daughters, wives, lives reduced to evidence on a wall. What's your plan? Sarah turned from the window, and for the first time since he'd met her, Daniel saw the steel underneath her gentle exterior. I'm going to expose them, not through lawsuits they can settle or investigations they can buy off. I'm going public, newspapers, television, everywhere I can reach. I have the evidence, the testimonies from families, the chemical analyses, everything needed to prove pattern and negligence. They'll destroy you. They already destroyed me. Sarah's voice was quiet but absolute. They took my mother, my sight, my childhood. But they left me alive, and that was their mistake, because I've spent every day since then preparing for this moment. Daniel stood, moved to the wall, traced his finger down to Maria's photograph. She was smiling in the picture, probably taken at Sofia's 3rd birthday party. She'd worn that yellow dress, the one Sofia had later insisted on keeping even though it didn't fit anyone. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need, I'm in. Daniel, they're dangerous. If they find out you're helping me. They already took my wife. They don't get my daughter too. He turned to face Sarah. And they don't get to win. Sarah's expression shifted. Relief, gratitude, determination all mixed together. She extended her hand and Daniel took it, sealing an alliance born from shared grief and righteous fury. What neither of them knew was that Sofia had left school early that day with a stomachache and was currently standing in the hallway outside Sarah's apartment. She'd heard everything, every word about her mother's death, about the 15 murdered women, about the conspiracy that had stolen Maria Torres from their lives. And as she stood there, tears streaming down her 8-year-old face, Sofia Torres made a decision that would change everything. Sofia didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply opened the door that her father had left slightly ajar and walked into the middle of a truth that children should never have to carry. Daniel's face went white when he saw her. Sofia, mija, what are you? You're supposed to be at school. Mrs. Palmer sent me home. My stomach hurt. Sofia's voice was small but steady, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now, as if she'd cried out everything she had during her time in the hallway. Mommy didn't just get sick, did she? Someone hurt her. The question landed like a grenade in the quiet apartment. Sarah moved first, crossing the space between them with surprising speed, kneeling down until she was at Sofia's eye level. How much did you hear, sweetie? All of it. The chemicals, the 15 ladies, the bad company that makes people sick. Sofia's lower lip trembled, but she bit it, visibly forcing herself to be brave. You're trying to stop them. You and Daddy. Daniel wanted to lie, to cushion her from this horror, to rebuild the protective walls he'd spent 3 years constructing around her childhood. But Sarah spoke first, and her words cut through his parental instinct with surgical precision. Yes, we're trying to stop them so no other little girls lose their mommies the way you and I lost ours. Sofia looked between them, her father, rigid with fear and helplessness, and Sarah, blind but somehow seeing her more clearly than anyone had in years. Can I help? Absolutely not, Daniel said immediately. Sofia, this is adult business, dangerous business. But Mommy was my mommy too. Sofia's voice rose, not with childish petulance, but with legitimate grief, finally given permission to be angry. I should get to help make it right. Sarah's hand found Sofia's shoulder. Your father's right that it's dangerous. But Sofia, there's something you could help with that wouldn't put you at risk. Would you like to hear about it? Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but the look Sarah gave him, please, trust me, stopped the words in his throat. What is it? Sofia asked. I've been collecting stories from the families of the women who died. Their memories, their favorite things about them, the lives they lived before Western textile stole them away. Sarah's voice softened. But I'm missing something important. I have facts and evidence, but I don't have heart. I don't have the kind of details that make people understand these weren't just victims. They were real people, with real families who loved them. Sofia's brow furrowed in concentration. You want me to tell you about Mommy? I want you to help me remember her properly, the way she deserves to be remembered. And just like that, Sarah had transformed Sofia's grief into purpose. They spent the rest of the afternoon at Daniel's kitchen table, Sofia talking while Sarah recorded everything on a small tape recorder she'd retrieved from her apartment. Daniel made coffee. He didn't drink and listened to his daughter excavate memories he'd thought were lost to time. Mommy always hummed when she sewed, Sofia said, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. Not real songs, just made-up tunes, different ones for different projects. She said the fabric told her what music it wanted. Sarah smiled. What else? She smelled like cinnamon, even when she wasn't cooking. I think maybe it was her lotion? Sofia's face scrunched up with the effort of recalling. And she had this thing she'd do. Whenever I was scared or sad, she'd take my hand and squeeze it 3 times. She said it meant I love you, in a secret code. 1 squeeze for each word. Daniel's chest tightened. He'd forgotten that. How had he forgotten that? She used to do the same thing to me, he said quietly. 3 squeezes. I thought it was just her way of being affectionate. It was her way of saying what mattered most. Sarah's fingers moved across her braille notepad, recording details even as the tape captured Sofia's voice. What was her favorite thing to make? What did she sew when she was sewing for herself, not for work? Sofia brightened. Dresses for my dolls. She'd use scrap fabric and make these tiny perfect dresses with real buttons and everything. I still have them in my room. Could I touch one of them? Sarah asked carefully. I understand clothing through texture. It might help me understand her better. 5 minutes later, they were in Sofia's bedroom, a space Daniel typically cleaned but rarely entered, respecting his daughter's need for private territory. The walls were covered with Sofia's drawings, increasingly sophisticated renderings of horses and gardens and families. Maria's sewing machine sat in the corner, draped with a sheet, untouched since her death. Sofia opened her toy chest and pulled out 3 dolls, each wearing a different elaborate dress. This one's my favorite, she said, holding up a doll in a blue gingham dress with white lace trim. Mommy made it for my 6th birthday. It was the last one before she got really sick. Sarah's fingers traced the tiny garment with the reverence of someone reading Braille, absorbing information through touch that others would miss through sight. The stitching is incredible, hand-sewn, every seam perfectly straight. And the lace. She tatted this herself, didn't she? How can you tell? Daniel asked, amazed. Machine lace has a different texture, slightly more uniform. This has the tiny irregularities that come from human hands. Sarah smiled. Your wife was an artist, Daniel. Not just a seamstress, an artist. Sofia set the doll down carefully and moved to her nightstand, opening the drawer. She pulled out a photograph in a wooden frame, Maria at her sewing machine, laughing at something off camera, her hands frozen mid-motion over fabric. This is my favorite picture of her, Sofia said softly. She looks happy. Sarah held the frame, her fingers tracing the edges, unable to see the image but honoring it nonetheless. Tell me about the moment this was taken. What was happening? Daddy was being silly, trying to distract her from work. He'd put on one of her hats, the fancy one she wore to church, and was pretending to be a fashion model. Sofia giggled at the memory. Mommy laughed so hard she couldn't see to sew. She told him he was a menace. A lovable menace, Daniel corrected, his voice thick. She always added the lovable part. The smallest memories hold the greatest weight. They spent another hour like that, Sofia excavating story after story while Sarah listened and recorded and took notes. Daniel watched his daughter transform before his eyes, the grief that had been locked inside her for 3 years finally finding release through purpose. She wasn't just remembering her mother, she was ensuring Maria would never be forgotten. As evening approached and Daniel started preparing dinner, Sofia stayed close to Sarah, helping her navigate the apartment with increasing confidence. They developed an easy rhythm. Sofia would describe obstacles or changes in terrain, and Sarah would follow her guidance with complete trust. "Miss Sarah," Sofia said as they set the table together, "when you tell people about Mommy and the other ladies, will you make sure everyone knows they were good? That they didn't do anything wrong?" "That's exactly what I'll make sure everyone knows." Sarah's hand found Sofia's head, rested there gently. They were good people who deserved better, who deserved justice. Will the bad people go to jail? The question hung in the air. Daniel paused in his cooking, waiting for Sarah's answer. "I don't know, sweetie. Sometimes the world doesn't punish bad people the way it should. Sometimes they have too much money or too much power." Sarah's voice was honest, refusing to offer false comfort. "But even if they don't go to jail, we can make sure everyone knows what they did. We can make sure no more mommies get hurt, and sometimes that's the best justice we can get." Sofia considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "That's still worth doing." "Yes, it is." After dinner, Sofia asked Sarah to tell another story. Not a made-up one this time, but a real one about her mother, Catherine. They sat on the couch, Sofia curled against Sarah's side in a position that had become natural over just a few days. "My mom loved to garden," Sarah began. "We had this tiny backyard, barely bigger than a closet, but she filled it with tomatoes and herbs and flowers. She said good things could grow in small spaces if you gave them enough love and attention. Like Mommy's plants," Sofia said, pointing to the windowsill where Maria's plants still thrived under Daniel's reluctant care. "Daddy says he doesn't have a green thumb, but they keep growing anyway." "That's because they remember being loved," Sarah said simply. "Plants carry memory in their roots." Daniel listened from the kitchen, washing dishes that didn't need washing, struck by how naturally Sarah had woven herself into their lives. In less than a week, she'd become something essential, not replacing Maria, but filling a different space, one that had been empty since his wife's death. A space for truth, for alliance, for shared purpose. But as he watched his daughter fall asleep against Sarah's shoulder, the same way she had that first night, Daniel felt the cold finger of fear trace down his spine. They were planning to go up against Garrett Industries, a company with unlimited resources, political connections, and a proven willingness to kill to protect their interests. And now, Sofia was part of it, whether Daniel wanted her to be or not. His daughter had already lost one parent to Western Textile Solutions. Daniel would die before he let them take anything else from her. Outside, the California evening settled into darkness, and in a downtown office 50 miles away, someone was reviewing security footage from the public library, watching Daniel Torres scroll through archived newspapers. The machinery of retaliation was already beginning to turn. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the casual brutality of a bomb in a birthday present. Daniel was at work, running fabric through the industrial cutter, when Chuck Brennan appeared at his station with an expression that made Daniel's stomach drop. His supervisor, Sarah's father, looked 10 years older than he had the previous week, his face gray and drawn. "We need to talk. Break room. Now." They walked in silence past the rows of machines, past co-workers who suddenly found their work fascinating enough to avoid eye contact. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and disappointment, its walls yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke despite the no-smoking signs. Chuck closed the door, checked the hallway twice, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "This was on my car windshield this morning, under the wiper blade." Daniel unfolded it. The message was typed, impersonal. "We know your daughter is asking questions. Make her stop or we'll stop her permanently. Catherine should have taught you this lesson already." The paper trembled in Daniel's hands. "They know," Chuck said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how, but they know Sarah's building a case, and now they're threatening her again." His fist slammed against the table, making the sugar packets jump. "I lost Katie to these monsters. I won't lose Sarah too." "Does Sarah know about this?" "Not yet. I came straight here after finding it. Daniel, I know what you two are planning. Sarah tells me everything, always has, even when I beg her not to." Chuck's eyes were bloodshot, desperate. "You have to convince her to stop, to let this go. You know she won't. Then you have to pull out, stop helping her. She can't do this alone. Without your evidence, without Maria's samples, she doesn't have enough for a real exposé." Chuck grabbed Daniel's arm. "I'm not proud of asking you to abandon her, but I'm asking anyway, as a father. Please." Daniel thought about Sofia, about the way she'd fallen asleep on Sarah's shoulder, about the purpose his daughter had finally found after 3 years of aimless grief. He thought about 15 dead women, and how many more might follow if someone didn't stop Western textile solutions. "I can't," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Chuck, but I can't." The older man's face crumpled. "Then God help us all." Daniel left work early again, this time without bothering to invent an excuse. The November air carried the smell of approaching rain, and the sky hung low and threatening over San Bernardino. He drove to Sofia's school, arriving an hour before dismissal, and sat in the pickup line with his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The threat had mentioned Catherine specifically. "Should have taught you this lesson already." They'd killed her once, to silence the family. They'd do it again without hesitation. And Sofia. Sweet, brave Sofia, who'd inserted herself into this fight with the fearless certainty of childhood. She was exposed now, vulnerable in ways Daniel hadn't fully considered when he'd agreed to help Sarah. When Sofia emerged from the school building, chattering with friends, Daniel's heart clenched. She looked so small, so innocent, backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she waved goodbye to her classmates. She had no idea that men in expensive suits were deciding whether she was enough of a threat to eliminate. "Daddy!" She brightened when she saw him. "You're early. Is Miss Sarah with you?" "Just us today, mija. Get in." Something in his tone made her quiet during the drive home. She studied his profile with those two observant eyes, Maria's eyes, seeing more than he wanted her to see. "Something bad happened," she said, as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. "We'll talk about it inside." But inside, they found Sarah waiting in the hallway outside apartment 308, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. The first time Daniel had seen her composure crack. She held a letter, and even from a distance he could see it was similar to the one Chuck had received. "How did you—" "Your supervisor called me," Sarah said. "Told me about the threat. Then I came home and found this in my mailbox." Daniel took the letter. The message was more direct. "Stop your investigation or the Torres girl dies first. We know where she goes to school." Sofia read it over his shoulder before he could stop her. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply went very still, the way animals do when they sense a predator. "They're trying to scare us," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Threats are cheaper than action. If they really wanted to hurt us, they wouldn't announce it first." unless they're giving us one chance to back down before they escalate. Daniel pulled Sofia against his side, protective. Sarah, maybe your father's right. Maybe we need to… No. Sofia's voice was small but absolute. We can't stop. If we stop, they win, and then they'll hurt more people's mommies. Children understand justice with a clarity adults have learned to compromise. Sarah knelt down, her hands finding Sofia's shoulders with practiced precision. Sofia, sweetheart, this isn't a game anymore. These people are very dangerous. Your safety has to come first. But what about all the other kids? The ones whose moms might get sick if we don't stop the bad people? Sofia's voice cracked. Don't they matter too? Daniel watched his daughter wrestle with impossible moral calculations that no 8-year-old should have to make. He wanted to tell her that her safety was worth more than any number of hypothetical victims, that protecting her was his only obligation, that sometimes the right thing was to let someone else fight the battle. But he couldn't. Because she was right. We need to be smarter about this, he said finally. More careful. Sarah, do you have somewhere else you can stay? Somewhere they don't know about? My father's house in Riverside. But Daniel… No arguments. You're moving there tonight. Take all your evidence with you. Daniel's mind was working quickly now, calculating angles. And Sofia and I are going to visit my aunt in Bakersfield for a few days. We'll tell the school it's a family emergency. You're running. Sarah's voice held disappointment. We're regrouping. There's a difference. Daniel met her sightless gaze. You said you wanted to go public with this, right? Newspapers, television? Yes, but I need more time to prepare the presentation, to organize the evidence in a way that… We don't have more time. They're already moving against us. Daniel pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card he'd been carrying since Maria's funeral. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times who'd tried to interview him about Maria's death, claiming she was investigating a pattern of industrial poisoning cases. He'd refused then, too consumed by grief to think beyond the next day. We contact this reporter tonight. We give her everything you have, everything Maria saved, and we let her run with it. That's not how I planned this. I wanted to control the narrative, to ensure the story was told correctly. Plans change when people threaten to kill children. Daniel's voice was hard. We go loud, we go now, and we make it impossible for them to silence us quietly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her jaw working as she processed this shift in strategy. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but we do it together. All three of us go to my father's house tonight. We organize the evidence there, and we call this reporter as a team. Sarah, having Sofia present is non-negotiable. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. If we're going to tell Maria's story, Sofia should be part of telling it. Not as a victim, but as a witness. As someone who has the right to demand justice for her mother. Daniel looked down at his daughter, who was watching both adults with fierce attention. Mija, what do you think? I think Miss Sarah's right, Sofia said. I want to help tell Mommy's story. I want people to know what they did to her. So it was decided. They spent the next 3 hours in controlled chaos, Sarah packing her evidence into boxes while Daniel threw clothes and essentials into duffel bags. Sofia moved between apartments, helping both adults, her child's energy transformed into focused purpose. As evening fell, they loaded everything into Daniel's truck, working quickly, watching for surveillance they couldn't see but knew was there. The Mariposa Arms had never felt more oppressive, its walls seeming to lean in with malevolent attention. Wait, Sofia said as they were about to leave. Mommy's plants. We can't leave them. Mija, we don't have room. But Sofia was already running back inside, returning with the 4 small pots from the windowsill cradled carefully in her arms. Maria's plants, a spider plant, 2 succulents, and a small jade tree that had been a wedding gift from Maria's mother. They'll die if we leave them, Sofia insisted, And Mommy loved them. Sarah smiled, tears gathering in her sightless eyes. Make room for the plants, Daniel. They're coming with us. They left San Bernardino as the sun set, the truck overloaded with evidence and plants, and the fragile hope that exposure might be a better weapon than silence. In the rearview mirror, Daniel watched the Mariposa arms disappear, wondering if they'd ever return. What he didn't see was the black sedan that pulled out 3 cars behind them, following at a discreet distance, reporting their destination via radio to people who'd already decided that letting the Torres family reach Riverside was not an option. The threat had been a courtesy. Now came the consequences. The road to Riverside wound through dark hills scattered with orange groves, their fruit glowing like small moons in the truck's headlights. Daniel kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for the black sedan he'd spotted 3 miles back, trying to convince himself it was paranoia, until the same vehicle appeared again after he'd taken 2 random turns. They were being followed, not subtly anymore, but with the confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. "Sarah," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Sofia, who'd fallen asleep in the middle seat with her head against Sarah's shoulder. "We have company. Black sedan, maybe half a mile back." Sarah's hand tightened on Sofia's shoulder. "How long?" "Since we left San Bernardino, maybe before." Daniel's mind raced through options, none of them good. "Your father's house, do they know about it?" "I've been careful, but—" Sarah's voice dropped. "Daniel, my father's name is on the deed. If they've been watching him, they know." "Then we can't go there." The highway stretched ahead, empty of other traffic, offering no cover or witnesses. Daniel pressed harder on the accelerator, but the sedan matched his speed effortlessly. Whoever was driving wasn't trying to catch them yet, just letting them know they were trapped. "Wake Sofia," Daniel said. "Gently. She needs to be ready." Sarah's hand moved to Sofia's face, stroking her cheek until the girl stirred. "Sweetie, I need you to wake up now. Can you do that for me?" Sofia blinked awake, instantly sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" "The bad people are following us," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm. "But I need you to trust me, okay? Whatever happens, you stay low and you hold on to Miss Sarah." The sedan accelerated, closing the distance. Daniel's options narrowed. The next town was 10 miles ahead. Too far. The orange groves pressed close to the road, their ordered rows disappearing into darkness. Then he saw it. A dirt service road cutting between the groves, barely visible, the kind that farmers used to access irrigation equipment. "Hold on," he said, and cranked the wheel hard. The truck lurched off the highway, bouncing violently over the rutted dirt road. Behind them, the sedan's headlights swung to follow, but the luxury car wasn't built for off-road pursuit. Daniel gained precious seconds as the sedan struggled with the terrain. "There's a farmhouse," Sarah said suddenly. "Quarter-mile east. I visited it with my father years ago. An old friend of his, a man named Luis Cordero. He's good people, Daniel. He'll help." "How do you know we're near it?" "The smell. Orange blossoms and diesel fuel from the irrigation pumps. I'd recognize it anywhere." Daniel followed her directions, navigating by instinct and faith through the dark groves. The truck's headlights carved tunnels of light through the trees, and somewhere behind them the sedan was still coming, slower now, but persistent. The farmhouse materialized out of the darkness, a small structure with a light burning in the front window and a barn visible in the yard. Daniel killed the headlights and coasted to a stop, pulling behind the barn where the truck would be hidden from the road. Everyone out, quick and quiet. They moved in synchronized silence, Daniel carrying their most critical evidence box, Sarah holding Sofia's hand, Sofia clutching Maria's plants against her chest. The farmhouse door opened before they reached it, revealing a man in his 60s with weathered brown skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Sarah Brennan?" His voice carried surprise and concern. "What in God's name?" "Luis, we need help. People are chasing us. Dangerous people, and we have nowhere else to go. Luis Cordero didn't ask questions. He simply stepped aside, ushered them in, and locked the door behind them. Through the window, they saw headlights sweep past on the service road. The sedan, searching. How many? Luis asked, moving to the window with the practiced calm of someone who'd faced trouble before. At least one carload, maybe more. Daniel set down the evidence box, his hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. Mr. Cordero, I'm sorry to bring this to your door, but Chuck Brennan's been my friend for 30 years. His daughter needs help. I give help. Simple. Luis pulled curtains closed, blocking the windows. You're the ones going after Western Textile? You know about them? Everyone in agriculture knows about them. They've been dumping chemical waste in irrigation water for years, paying off inspectors, poisoning soil. Luis's face hardened. My nephew worked for them once, got sick, died within a year. They said it was unrelated. We knew better. Sarah's voice was urgent. Luis, we have evidence that could expose them, but we need to contact a reporter, get the story out before they can stop us. Do you have a phone? In the kitchen, but if they're watching this closely, your phone lines might be compromised. Then we drive to the reporter directly. Daniel was already planning. Los Angeles is 2 hours from here. We wait until they give up searching these groves, then we make a run for it. Or, Luis said quietly, you let me make a call. I know people, union organizers, farm worker advocates, folks who've been fighting Garrett Industries for years. They can get your evidence to the right people, even if something happens to you. Sometimes salvation comes from unexpected allies. Sofia had been silent since they entered the house, still clutching the plants, her eyes wide and frightened. Now she spoke, her voice small. Are they going to kill us like they killed Mommy? The bluntness of the question hit like a slap. Luis looked at Sarah, then Daniel, reading the terrible truth in their faces. Not while I'm breathing, Luis said firmly. He moved to a closet, pulled out a hunting rifle. And I'm a very stubborn man about breathing. While Luis made his calls, speaking rapid Spanish to contacts Daniel couldn't follow, Sarah organized the evidence on the kitchen table with Sofia's help. Photographs, documents, Maria's fabric samples, the tape recordings of Sofia's testimony. Everything laid out with the precision of a court presentation. Daniel watched them work, struck by how naturally they moved together. Sarah's hands guided by Sofia's descriptions, Sofia understanding instinctively what Sarah needed without being told. In less than a week, they'd developed the kind of nonverbal communication that usually took years to build. Miss Sarah, Sofia said softly, if something bad happens tonight, will you make sure people still know about Mommy? Nothing bad is going to happen. But if it does, Sofia's maturity was heartbreaking. Promise me people will know she was good, that she didn't deserve what they did to her. Sarah pulled Sofia close and Daniel saw tears track down her face, the first time she'd allowed herself to cry since this began. I promise, sweetie, I promise. Luis returned from his calls. My contacts are mobilizing. By morning, copies of your evidence will be in 6 different locations. Newspapers, television stations, legal aid organizations. Even if Garrett Industries stops you, the story gets out. How long do we need to hold out? Daniel asked. Until dawn. Then my people will be here with protection. Real protection. Not just an old farmer with a rifle. 6 hours. They had to survive 6 hours. Outside, engines rumbled closer. The black sedan had returned, and it hadn't come alone. Through gaps in the curtains, Daniel counted at least 3 vehicles now, parking in a loose perimeter around the farmhouse. Luis checked his rifle, his expression grim. They're not going to wait until dawn. A loudspeaker crackled to life outside, the voice professional and utterly cold. Daniel Torres, Sarah Brennan, we know you're inside. Send out the evidence and the child. and we'll let the rest of you leave unharmed. You have 5 minutes to comply." Sofia's hand found Daniel's, squeezed 3 times. "I love you." The secret code Maria had taught her, now passed from daughter to father in the face of violence that should never touch children. Daniel squeezed back 3 times, then knelt to Sofia's level. "Remember what I said about trusting me?" She nodded. "Good, because I need you to be braver than you've ever been." He looked at Sarah, then Luis. "How good is your barn for hiding?" "It's got a root cellar," Luis said. "Underground, accessed through a trapdoor in the tack room. They'd never find it unless they knew exactly where to look. That's where Sofia and Sarah are going, right now." Daniel stood, his decision made. "I'm going out there." "Daniel, no," Sarah started. "They want the evidence? Fine, I'll give them the evidence. Everything on that table." Daniel's voice was steady, calm with the certainty of someone who'd found the only move left to play. "But not the copies Luis already sent out. By the time they realize they're getting duplicates, your people will have the real evidence, and this story will be too big to bury." "They'll kill you," Sarah said flatly. "Maybe, but probably not immediately. They'll want to make sure I didn't hide anything else first. That buys you time." Daniel pulled Sofia into a fierce hug. "And it keeps my daughter safe. That's all that matters." Luis was already moving, gathering the evidence into a bag. "I'll go with you. 2 witnesses are harder to disappear than 1. Luis, my nephew, my land, my choice." The old farmer's face was set. "Besides, I'm too old and too tired to hide in cellars. Rather face them standing up." The loudspeaker barked again. 4 minutes! Sarah grabbed Daniel's face, forced him to look at her despite her inability to see him. "If you die out there, I'll never forgive you. Then I'll make sure to survive." He kissed her forehead, surprising himself with the gesture's tenderness. "Take care of Sofia, and finish what we started." Sofia was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as Sarah pulled her toward the barn. At the door, she looked back one last time. 3 squeezes, Daddy. 3 squeezes, mija. Always." Then they were gone, and Daniel stood in Luis Cordero's farmhouse with a bag of evidence that might save the world or get him killed, preparing to walk into the darkness, where armed men waited to decide his fate. Outside, the loudspeaker announced, "Time's up. We're coming in." Daniel opened the door before they could break it down, the bag held high where they could see it. "I'm here. I'm cooperating. Nobody needs to get hurt." The men who emerged from the shadows wore suits, not uniforms, but they carried their weapons with professional competence. Private security, probably. The kind Garrett Industries could hire and disavow if things went wrong. Their leader, a man with silver hair and empty eyes, smiled coldly. "Mr. Torres, how reasonable of you. Now, where are the woman and the girl?" "Gone. They left an hour ago." Daniel's lie was smooth, practiced. "Headed to Los Angeles. I stayed behind to negotiate." Silverhair studied him, clearly weighing the truth of the statement. Behind him, his men waited for orders. "Search the house," he finally said. "If he's lying, we'll know soon enough." And that's when the shooting started. Section 7. The first shot came not from Garrett Industries' men, but from the orange groves, a sharp crack that sent Silverhair diving for cover, and his men scrambling for positions behind their vehicles. Luis Cordero's contacts had arrived early. Daniel dropped to the ground as bullets shattered the farmhouse windows, covering his head as glass rained down around him. Through the chaos, he heard engines roaring up the service road. Trucks, multiple vehicles, headlights blazing through the darkness like cavalry charging into battle. But these weren't police. Police would have announced themselves, followed protocol, tried negotiation first. These were farm workers. Dozens of them, pouring out of pickup trucks and vans, armed with hunting rifles and baseball bats and righteous fury that had been building for decades. Luis hadn't called lawyers or reporters first. He'd called the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, and they'd mobilized every family that had lost someone to Garrett Industries poison. "Nobody moves!" A woman's voice cut through the gunfire, amplified by a bullhorn. "Drop your weapons, or the next shots won't be warning shots!" Silverhair's men hesitated, caught between training and mathematics. They were outnumbered 4-1 by people who had nothing left to lose. "You're interfering with private security conducting lawful business," Silverhair shouted back, but his voice lacked conviction. "Lawful?" The woman stepped into the light, mid-40s, weathered face, union jacket over work clothes. "You're on Luis Cordero's property without a warrant, threatening civilians. That's called assault with deadly weapons where I come from." Maria Elena Gutierrez, Daniel would learn later. Union organizer, mother of 3, widow of one of Western Textile Solutions' earliest victims. She'd been building a case against Garrett Industries for 8 years, waiting for the right moment to strike. Tonight was that moment. "Luis," she called, "you and Torres get out here where we can see you're alive." Daniel stood slowly, hands visible, and moved toward the door. Luis emerged from the barn. He'd never gone inside with Daniel, had instead circled around to provide covering fire if needed. The old farmer's rifle was still smoking. "I'm fine, Maria Elena. They came looking for evidence about Western Textile." Luis's voice carried across the yard. "Evidence that proves they've been murdering people for profit." A murmur ran through the farm workers, anger rippling like wind through wheat. Silverhair was calculating odds. Daniel could see it in his face. He could order his men to fight, but bodies would pile up on both sides. And many witnesses couldn't be silenced. Or he could retreat, report back to his employers that the situation had escalated beyond containment. "This isn't over," Silverhair said finally, gesturing his men back to their vehicles. "Garrett Industries has legal resources you can't imagine. You'll all be sued into oblivion." "Let them try." Maria Elena's smile was sharp. "We've got 30 years of documented evidence, 50 families ready to testify, and now we've got whatever Torres and Sarah Brennan collected. Plus, you just committed assault with firearms in front of 60 witnesses. So yeah, bring your lawyers. We'll see who ends up in court." The private security team retreated, their vehicles disappearing into the night, with the bitter taste of tactical defeat. But Daniel knew Silverhair was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Garrett Industries wouldn't surrender because of one failed intimidation attempt. They'd escalate. Unless the story went public first. "Where's Sarah and the girl?" Maria Elena asked, lowering the bullhorn. "Safe. Hidden." Daniel's legs felt weak now that the adrenaline was fading. "But we need to move fast. They'll be back with more people, or they'll try legal maneuvers to seize the evidence before we can publish it." "Then we don't wait." Maria Elena pulled out a walkie-talkie. "Carlos, you there?" "Static, then." "Here, Heffa. Get Sarah Mitchell on the phone. Tell her the Farm Workers Network is taking this story national. Tonight. We've got contacts at every newspaper and television station in California. By morning, Garrett Industries won't be able to stop this even if they wanted to. The powerful fear exposure more than violence." Luis led them to the barn, and Daniel descended into the root cellar, a small underground space that smelled of earth and potatoes in safety. Sarah sat on an overturned crate with Sofia curled in her lap, both of them rigid with tension. Maria's plants sat arranged carefully beside them, somehow still intact. "Daddy!" Sofia launched herself at Daniel, and he caught her, holding tight enough to leave bruises, not caring. "I'm okay, mija. We're all okay." Sarah stood, her face pale but composed. "We heard shooting. The Union showed up, scared off Garrett's people." Daniel looked at Maria Elena, who'd followed him down. "Sarah Brennan, meet Maria Elena Gutierrez. She's taking over our fight." "Partnering in your fight," Maria Elena corrected. She moved to Sarah, took her hand. My husband died from the same chemicals that killed your mother and Mrs. Torres. I've been waiting 8 years for someone with hard evidence to come forward. Tonight, you became that someone. Over the next hour, the farmhouse transformed into a war room. Maria Elena's people brought in equipment: phones, a portable fax machine, even a small television. Reporters started arriving around midnight, drawn by tips from union contacts, sensing a story too big to ignore. Daniel watched Sarah tell Maria's story to a journalist from the Los Angeles Times, the same reporter whose card he'd been carrying. She laid out the evidence with devastating precision. 15 confirmed deaths, chemical analyses showing illegal toxins, financial records proving corporate knowledge, testimony from families, and Maria's preserved fabric samples that made it impossible to deny. And this little girl, Sarah said, her hand finding Sofia's shoulder, lost her mother because a company decided profits mattered more than lives. How many other children have to become orphans before someone holds Garrett Industries accountable? The reporter's pen flew across her notepad. Behind her, a television crew filmed everything, their cameraman zooming in on the photographs of dead women, on the damning documents, on Sofia's solemn face as she held up one of her mother's doll dresses. My mommy made beautiful things, Sofia said to the camera, her voice steady despite her fear. She made people happy with her sewing, and the bad people killed her for it. That's not fair. Out of the mouths of babes came the truth that adults dressed in complicated language. It wasn't fair. It was murder. By 3 a.m, the story had been filed with multiple news outlets. By 4, the first radio stations were reporting it. By 5, as dawn painted the orange groves in shades of gold and pink, the phone in Luis's farmhouse was ringing constantly. Other reporters, lawyers offering pro bono services, families of victims from across California who'd finally found validation for their suspicions. And at 6 o'clock, exactly 12 hours after Daniel and Sofia had fled San Bernardino, the FBI arrived, not to arrest them, to investigate Garrett Industries. The agent in charge, a woman named Patricia Morrison with tired eyes and a bulging briefcase, sat down across from Sarah and Daniel at Luis's kitchen table. Sofia had finally fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted, still clutching one of Maria's plants. "I'm going to be honest with you," Agent Morrison said. "Garrett Industries is well connected. This investigation is going to be ugly, prolonged, and they're going to fight every step with expensive lawyers and political pressure." "But," Sarah prompted, "but you just gave us something we've been trying to build for 5 years. A case with documentation, witnesses, physical evidence, and, most importantly, enough public attention that burying it would be more damaging than prosecuting it." Morrison pulled documents from her briefcase. "I need both of you to understand what happens next. You'll be deposed, probably multiple times. Your lives will be examined under a microscope. Garrett's lawyers will try to destroy your credibility, dig up every mistake you've ever made." "I don't care," Daniel said, "as long as they pay for what they did to Maria. And Catherine," Sarah added, "and all the others. And my husband Miguel," Maria Elena said from the doorway, where she'd been listening. "And Luis's nephew Roberto. And the 50 other people we've documented." Agent Morrison nodded slowly. "Then we have an understanding. This won't be fast, and it won't be easy. But if you're all willing to fight, we'll make sure Garrett Industries faces justice." The sun rose fully over the orange groves, painting everything in warm light that felt almost sacred. Daniel stood at the window, watching Sofia sleep, thinking about Maria and how she would have been proud of their daughter's courage. Sarah joined him, her hand finding his arm. "We did it. We survived. That's not the same as winning." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it's the first step, and sometimes that's enough." Behind them, reporters continued arriving, cameras and microphones transforming Luis Cordero's simple farmhouse into the epicenter of what would become one of California's largest corporate accountability cases. The story was too big to contain now, spreading across morning newspapers and television broadcasts, forcing politicians to comment, sparking outrage in communities across the state. Garrett Industries' stock price had dropped 12% before the market even opened. And in a downtown office tower, executives were discovering that all their money and connections couldn't stop a story told by a blind woman, a widowed factory worker, a union organizer, and an 8-year-old girl who'd lost her mother. Justice, when it finally comes, arrives not with thunder but with persistence. Sofia stirred, woke, saw her father and Sarah standing together in the morning light. She smiled. A real smile, uncomplicated by grief for the first time in 3 years. "We won," she asked sleepily. "We're winning," Daniel corrected. "There's still a lot of fight ahead." "That's okay." Sofia sat up, stretched. "Miss Sarah says the best things are worth fighting for." Sarah knelt beside the couch, pulled Sofia into a hug. "You were so brave, sweetie. Your mother would be so proud." "I know," Sofia said simply. "I felt her with us, the whole time. She was here." And maybe she was. Maybe Maria Torres' spirit had guided them through the darkness, had protected her daughter one last time, had ensured that her death would mean something more than just another statistic in a corporate ledger. Or maybe Sofia just needed to believe that. Either way, the effect was the same. The investigation would take 18 months. 12 Garrett Industries executives would eventually face criminal charges. Western Textile Solutions would be shut down permanently. Hundreds of families would receive settlements, though no amount of money could truly compensate for lives stolen. And Sarah Brennan would become a leading advocate for industrial safety reform, her blindness never limiting her vision for a world where profit didn't come at the cost of human lives. But that morning, in Luis Cordero's farmhouse surrounded by orange groves and righteous allies, they were simply 3 survivors who'd refused to let evil win quietly. Sofia stood, went to the window where Maria's plants sat catching sunlight. "They're still alive," she said wonderingly. "After everything, they're still growing." "Good things do that," Sarah replied. "They survive, even in the dark, especially in the dark." "Because someone loved them enough to carry them through," Daniel added, pulling both Sofia and Sarah close. Outside, the world was waking to their story. Inside, 3 people who'd found each other in grief were discovering something new. Hope. The courtroom in downtown Los Angeles smelled of old wood and expensive cologne, its high ceilings amplifying every whisper into collective judgment. It was April 1972, 18 months after that night in the orange groves, and Daniel Torres sat in the gallery wearing his only suit, the one he'd bought for Maria's funeral and hoped never to wear again. Sofia sat beside him in a new dress, her hand gripping his with white-knuckled intensity. On his other side, Sarah Brennan waited with the stillness of someone who'd learned patience through years of navigating a world designed for the sighted. The final verdict was about to be read. Garrett Industries had fought every step, filing motions, challenging evidence, attacking witnesses with the ruthless efficiency of lawyers paid by the hour to destroy lives. They'd tried to paint Daniel as an opportunist seeking money. They'd questioned Sarah's credibility because of her blindness. They'd even suggested that Maria Torres had known about the chemical dangers and accepted the risk. That last accusation had nearly broken Daniel's composure. Only Sarah's hand on his arm had kept him from standing up in court and saying things that would have destroyed their case. But the evidence was overwhelming. 53 confirmed deaths now, not 15. Chemical analyses that couldn't be refuted. Internal memos proving Garrett Industries had known about the dangers since 1963 and had chosen profit over safety. Testimony from workers, doctors, scientists, and families that painted a picture of systematic negligence bordering on intentional harm. The jury had deliberated for 6 days. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Margaret Chen asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood this case would define her legacy. "We have, Your Honor." The foreman, a middle-aged black man who'd lost his sister to breast cancer and had listened to every word of testimony with fierce attention, stood with the verdict papers. In the matter of the People versus Garrett Industries, on the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Daniel felt Sofia's hand squeeze his 3 times, felt Sarah's breath catch beside him, felt 18 months of fear and anger and exhausting hope finally release its grip on his chest. Around them, families who'd lost loved ones were crying, embracing, allowing themselves to believe that justice was possible even when fighting giants. Judge Chen's gavel restored order. On the charge of conspiracy to conceal evidence of criminal activity, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of reckless endangerment of workers? Guilty. 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 12 counts in total, each one representing years of corporate malfeasance, each one a vindication for the dead who couldn't speak for themselves. The sentencing would come later. Millions in fines, restitution to families, mandatory safety reforms across the textile industry, and criminal charges for 8 executives who'd knowingly approved the use of banned chemicals. But in that moment, the verdict itself was enough. They'd won. Not just a legal victory, but a moral one. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with cameras and microphones, hungry for the story's emotional climax. Sarah handled most of the questions with the practiced grace she'd developed over the past year, her blindness somehow making her more compelling on camera. A woman who'd lost her sight fighting to help others see the truth. "Miss Brennan, what's next for you?" a reporter from CBS asked. "We're establishing a foundation," Sarah said, her hand finding Daniel's shoulder. "The Maria Torres Memorial Fund for Worker Safety. It will provide legal support for families affected by industrial poisoning and push for stronger regulations across all manufacturing sectors." "And you, Mr. Torres? How does this verdict change things for you and your daughter?" Daniel looked down at Sofia, who was holding one of Maria's plants, the jade tree, now significantly larger than it had been that night they'd fled San Bernardino. His daughter had insisted on bringing it to court, claiming her mother needed to witness this moment. "It doesn't bring my wife back," Daniel said quietly. "Nothing can do that. But it means her death mattered. It means other families won't have to go through what we did. And it means my daughter can grow up knowing that fighting for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, that sometimes it actually works." Sofia spoke into the microphone without prompting, her voice clear and certain. "My mommy was good, and now everyone knows what happened to her wasn't her fault. That's important. From the mouths of children comes the truth adults spend lifetimes learning." The press conference ended, and they walked away from the courthouse through a crowd of supporters, union members, former Garrett Industries workers, families of victims, activists who'd joined the fight along the way. Maria Elena Gutierrez waited at the edge of the crowd, her face lit with triumph. "We did it, hermanos," she said, pulling them all into a fierce embrace. "We actually did it." Luis Cordero stood beside her, older and grayer than he'd been 18 months ago, but smiling with satisfaction. Miguel would have loved to see this day. And Roberto, and Catherine, and Maria, Daniel added softly. They returned to San Bernardino that evening, to the Mariposa Arms that had become home again after months of temporary housing during the trial. The apartment felt smaller somehow, as if they'd outgrown it through their ordeal, but Sofia had decorated the walls with new drawings, not just horses and gardens anymore, but courtrooms and groups of people holding hands, visual representations of justice and community. Sarah joined them for dinner, as she did most nights now. Her apartment next door had become an extension of theirs, the wall between them more symbolic than real. Over the past year and a half, she'd become something Daniel hadn't expected. Not a replacement for Maria, but a partner in his life. Someone who understood grief and survival, and the complicated work of building something new from loss. Sofia saw it before either adult acknowledged it. The way her father's face softened when Sarah entered a room. The way Sarah's laugh came more easily around Daniel. The way they'd started finishing each other's sentences and communicating in the shorthand of people who'd been through war together. "Miss Sarah," Sofia said over dessert, flan that Sarah had taught Daniel to make, a recipe from her own mother. "Are you going to marry my daddy?" Daniel choked on his coffee. Sarah went very still, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "Sofia, that's not... we haven't," Daniel stammered. "Because I think you should," Sofia continued with the devastating logic of a 10-year-old who'd learned to say what mattered. "You make him happy, and you make me happy, and Mommy would want us to be happy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetie, your mother would want Daddy to have someone who loves him," Sofia said firmly. "She told me that once before she died. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure Daddy didn't stay sad forever, that he deserved to find joy again." Daniel's throat tightened. He'd forgotten that conversation. Maria's final weeks had been such a blur of medication and pain and desperate hope. But now, hearing it through his daughter's memory, he felt Maria's permission like a benediction. "Sofia," he said carefully, "if Miss Sarah and I did decide to be together like that, you'd be okay with it?" "Daddy." Sofia's eye roll was pure preteen exasperation despite her age. "I've been okay with it for months. You two are the ones being slow." Sarah laughed through her tears, and Daniel found himself laughing too, the absurdity and beauty of the moment breaking through the last of his carefully maintained emotional walls. "Well," Sarah said, reaching across the table to find Daniel's hand, "I suppose we've been properly called out by a child." "Seems that way." They didn't get engaged that night or even that month, but something shifted, an acknowledgement that they were building towards something permanent, that the crisis that had brought them together had forged bonds strong enough to sustain a different kind of future. 6 months later, on a cool October evening in 1972, Daniel and Sarah were married in Luis Cordero's orange grove, surrounded by farm workers and union organizers, and families who'd become their chosen community. Sofia served as both flower girl and maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd helped design, carrying a bouquet that included clippings from Maria's plants. Chuck Brennan walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle, tears streaming down his face, finally able to celebrate something good after years of grief. Maria Elena Gutierrez officiated. She'd gotten ordained specifically for the occasion, claiming that people who'd fought together deserved to celebrate together. "Marriage," Maria Elena said in her ceremony, "is choosing to fight life's battles with a partner, and these two have already proven they know how to fight side by side." When Daniel and Sarah exchanged vows, Sofia stood between them, her hands held by both adults, a living bridge between grief and hope, past and future, loss and love. "I promise to honor Maria's memory," Sarah said, her voice steady, "and to help Sofia remember the mother who loved her first and best." "I promise to honor Catherine's memory," Daniel replied, "and to never forget that we're here because women braver than us refused to stay silent." They kissed to applause and cheers, and Sofia hugged them both with such fierce joy that the three of them nearly toppled over. The years that followed brought their own challenges. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of families navigate complex legal battles against corporations that put profit over safety. Sarah became a nationally recognized advocate, testifying before Congress about worker safety reform. Daniel left the textile factory and went back to school, eventually becoming a paralegal specializing in industrial injury cases. Sofia grew up surrounded by stories of resistance and justice, learning that ordinary people could challenge powerful institutions and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, win. She became a lawyer herself eventually, carrying forward the legacy her mother had unknowingly started, and her father and Sarah had fought to honor. The Mariposa Arms was eventually torn down, replaced by newer housing, but the Torres Brennan family kept Maria's plants, passing them down through generations like heirlooms. The jade tree lived longest, eventually growing large enough to require its own corner in their living room. Its thick trunk and abundant leaves, a testament to resilience and careful tending. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Sofia would tell her own children about their grandmother Maria, about her talent and kindness, about the injustice of her death, and about how 3 people who'd been broken by loss had found each other and chosen to fight back. "Your grandmother died," Sofia would say. But her story didn't end. Stories don't end as long as someone keeps telling them. On October 15th, 2024, a woman named Daniel Torres stood before a congressional committee advocating for expanded industrial safety regulations. She was Sofia's granddaughter, Maria's great-granddaughter, carrying forward a legacy that had started with a blind woman's determination, a widower's courage, and a child's insistence that justice mattered. Behind her sat a jade tree in a ceramic pot, impossibly old now, impossibly resilient, its roots deep and strong. Maria's tree, still growing, still surviving, still reminding everyone who saw it that the best things endure, even in darkness, especially in darkness, as long as someone loves them enough to carry them through. And they say, if you visit San Bernardino today and ask the old-timers about apartment 308 at the Mariposa Arms, they'll tell you that on certain October evenings, you can still hear 3 knocks on a door that no longer exists. A child's knock, urgent and hopeful, inviting a stranger to dinner and changing the world. If this story moved you, drop a comment below, sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because history isn't just made by the powerful, it's made by anyone brave enough to say, enough, and mean it.